Welcome everyone to this first webinar in our series on nationally determined contributions. My name is Nora Steurer. I am working with the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction, hosted by the United Nations Environment Programme, and it is my pleasure to welcome all of you and to thank you all for joining us. And a very special and warm thanks to our fantastic speakers today. Allow me to give you a brief introduction over what awaits you today, as well as about the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction. The Global Alliance of Buildings and Construction, or GlobalABC, has as its motto towards a zero-emission, efficient and resilient buildings and construction sector. We were founded at COP21 and, as I said, hosted by the United Nations Environment Programme. We currently have 120 members, including 27 countries, some of which have joined us today. Our goals are twofold: raising ambitions to meet the Paris climate goals for the buildings and construction sector, and mobilizing all actors along the value chain, recognizing that currently the value chain for the sector is very much fragmented. Our products and activities include flagship products, including our global status report, which gives a snapshot over the sector progress or regress, depending on where the status is. Global and regional roadmaps on key steps to take to decarbonize the sector, and importantly, a guide for nationally determined contributions, which, among others, we will be presenting today. We do also align ourselves with important political events to raise the voice for this important sector through things such as our Buildings Days and Building Action Symposium at the COPs, the Conference of the Party Climate Change Conferences, as well as regional roundtables. And we have several national and local alliances in place, among others in France, Mexico, Morocco, and Tunisia, to help buildings and construction stakeholders come together. Allow me to give you a brief introduction over our great speakers today. By alphabetical order, let me start with Mr. Samba Batyagal, who is Special Envoy of Mongolia for Climate Change at the Ministry of Environment and Tourism in Mongolia. We also welcome today Ms. Ibtisam Bouattai, who is Project Manager at the Ministry of Housing and Land Use Planning in Tunisia, as well as Peter Graham, who is Director of PAN Solutions and who has been developing the NDC guide. We furthermore welcome Mr. Bernd Hackman, who is Program Officer for Mitigation Data and Analysis Program at the UN Climate Change Secretariat, also known as the UNFCCC. Mr. Maolin Liu, Director for Industry Development of Healthy Building Research Center at the China Academy of Building Research. And Ms. Michelle Peña-Nels, Senior Country Engagement Specialist at the NDC Partnership. Before I introduce you to our agenda, a few words about questions. We very much welcome your questions, and we have reserved at the end of this webinar 30 minutes for Q&A. If you have questions during a presentation, we invite you to write those questions in the chat box. We will collect them and we will do our best to raise those questions to the respective speakers at the end. Please, when you write your question, please do indicate for which speaker they are. Or if they are globally for all speakers, please indicate that as well. Thank you. So, what awaits us today? We will, after this brief introduction, we will start with Mr. Bernd Hackman from the UNFCCC, the Climate Change Secretariat, on the NDC amendment process timeline and obligations of state actors. This will be followed by the NDC Partnership, Ms. Michelle Peña-Nels, on the revision of NDCs with enhanced ambition. And then we will have a presentation by Peter Graham on our guide to incorporating building actions in NDCs, followed by our case studies. We have 3, The first one of China by Maolin Liu, Chinese Academy of Building Research. Second one, Mongolia by Bachegal Samba, Ministry of Environment and Tourism. And third one, Tunisia by Ebdesem Bouatai, Ministry of Housing and Land Use Planning, Tunisia, followed by Q&A. Without further ado, I would then pass this presentation over to Mr. Bernd Heckmann from the UNFCCC for his presentation. Bernd, over to you.
Thank you, Nora, and thanks for having us or the Secretariat here presenting in the webinar. It's always a pleasure for us to do so, especially when, like in this case, the audience is maybe not necessarily only governments, but also the private sector and sectoral experts. Yeah, as you said, I just want to briefly kick off about what is happening on climate change under the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement, and how does that relate to the building sector. So I see you already got me the mouse control, and I can use this, move the slides. Okay, good, thanks very much. I very often start with this picture. So that is a picture, and then you mentioned yourself, ABC was founded during COP21. That is a picture from COP21, and that was the very first day. And what you see here is more than 150 heads of governments and heads of state that came together not only at the last day of the session to congratulate each other and to pat each other's back about how great everyone did and that we got the Paris Agreement, but that was actually taken on the very first day of the conference in Paris back in 2015, when something very remarkable happened. So these heads of state came together to actually say, we want the Paris Agreement and we all want to move together in one direction. And this direction is a climate resilient and low carbon future. And what is extremely remarkable about that is that, yeah, almost everyone, literally everyone around the world was on board to do so. And one of the key elements of the Paris Agreement, you mentioned it, and it's the title of this webinar, are the NDCs. And you see, I just copy one paragraph and then I leave it with this language. But each party shall prepare, communicate, and maintain successive nationally determined contributions that it intends to achieve. And that is mainly the heart of the Paris Agreement. It is that every government puts together its own contribution. So if I go to the next slide, the question is, what are these national contributions? And this is exactly where it becomes interesting for individual sectors, for everyone. National determined contributions are individual contributions by every government. And these contributions, and we went through all of them, we have more than 180 from all over, from literally every government. And they all look different. Every government is putting forward how they want to address climate change. And that is with policies, that is with targets, that is with support and support needs, that is about adaptation, economic indicators. So you see a very broad idea of what all this could be. And that is exactly where it becomes interesting for the building sector, because, and I will talk to that a little later, the building sector is part of the solution in many of these NDCs. But before I discuss like the specifics of the sector in the context of NDCs, just for everyone to really understand what does that mean. So we have NDCs that were put forward in 2015 prior to Paris, and people realize, or governments realize, this is not enough. We need to get better. We need to get more ambitious over time in order for us to reach the targets of 2 degree and 1.5 degrees Celsius increase. And the Paris Agreement does not tell you how you get there, but it kind of helps you to build the infrastructure, to set the international setting for everyone to move into this direction. And that means the agreement recognizes the need to take action over time. So it establishes a process that every 2 years, every 5 years, governments will submit a new NDC. And the first submission will happen very, very soon, next year, and by 2020, where there is the opportunity to enhance or update the NDCs before the Paris Agreement really kicks in. And the underlying principle of this process of every 5 years submitting a new NDC are called progression and ambition. So that means that every 5 years an NDC will be communicated by a government, and this NDC every 5 years has to be better than the last one. So with that, you are increasing, every government, but also the global community together increases the ambition over time. And the other principle is highest possible ambition. So that means that each time a government puts forward a new NDC, it first has to go through a process internally and determine what is really the best we can do. And these together, and you see this kind of spiral next to the text, these two principles together will ensure that we get towards reaching the objectives of the Paris Agreement. To make sure that everyone is living up to their own promises, but also to understand as a global community where we are, we have several feedback mechanisms in the Paris Agreement. And one is a global stocktake. Every 5 years, all governments come together and see, were we successful, or do we need new NDCs that are more ambitious with regard to the global goals? And every 2 years, every government will report on their climate action and also tracking the progress towards their own national determined contributions. So what does that mean? In the end, you create a process that looks more or less like this. So by next year, we will receive new NDCs. There will be the COP to start in 2020, the whole process. 2023, a global stocktake, and in 2025, the next NDCs come. And this will just continue until eventually the objectives of the Paris Agreement have been achieved. But how does that relate to the building sector is what we are always asked. And here it becomes extremely interesting. And please remember the picture I showed you earlier with all the heads of state and heads of government, because what they are actually were agreeing on is that, yes, we all will do this together. But normally they are not coming to sign or to cheer for an environmental agreement. So you see, this must be much more than just an environmental agreement, because basically it is about development. And what these heads of state, heads of governments are saying are, we as the global community, we want to develop in a certain direction. And for doing that, we need to bring all our sectors, all our economy, all our societies on board. And that is exactly also then where the building sector comes in, because we can only reach the objectives of the Paris Agreement. And in many cases, many governments are moving forward and speak about decarbonization, zero emissions, and so on. We can only do that when we have all actors and all stakeholders involved. And one of the key actors, as you obviously know, is the building sector. So already now many NDCs really take out the building sector as one of their key sectors to address GHG emissions. And they come forward with several mitigation strategies. And I'm sure we'll hear a couple of them. And I tried to summarize what I read over the NDCs that I looked at. But it's very often, and you're familiar with that, it's energy efficiency measures, energy efficiency standards that are important for the sector, energy conservation methods, green buildings, green communities, green cities were cited very often, sustainable construction methods, and of course the introduction of several building codes. So you see there's a lot of information in there, and governments are tackling it differently. And also in those NDCs where the building sector is not mentioned directly, it is indirectly included because a government just put forward an emission reduction target, and it is obvious that in many cases these targets can only be reached when all sectors contribute their bits and pieces and fair share. And I think what is also very important to see in this context is that Right now, we're experiencing a trend towards zero carbon or carbon neutrality by the middle of the century. We are receiving more and more of these long-term strategies, and there very often, very explicitly, the building sector is mentioned as one of the key sectors to address. That was from a mitigation side. What we also see is that, of course, the building sector plays a very important role in with regards to adaptation actions, because very often it is infrastructure that is hit by extreme weather events. And just to mention a few, but certainly hurricanes in the Caribbean require a different way of building and involving the building sector. So that is what we see in the NDCs covered right now. And as I said, right now is also the time where governments are actually working on two key documents. And I'm sure Michelle will talk about that in a minute when we talk about NDC enhancement. But by 2020, governments are asked to either revise the NDCs or to prepare new NDCs. And many governments are following this request by having broader stakeholder consultations, by really assessing which sectors can we better integrate into our NDCs. How can these sectors contribute to more climate ambition? At the same time, also by 2020, long-term strategies, long-term low-emission development strategies will be submitted to the Secretariat. We have received so far 12, but we got very strong signals from many, many countries that they are currently actively working on developing these underlying development strategies and plans for their climate action, but also development goals. So right now is actually the time where a lot of this is happening on a governmental level. And therefore, I really appreciate being here with you today to address these issues, because in the end, the governments are submitting these documents to us, to the UNFCCC, but it is the sectors and all the stakeholders within a country that are contributing to achieving what is in these documents. And therefore, right now is a very important time for discussing ambition in countries, but also for preparing NDCs, ambitious NDCs, and preparing national stakeholders for what is there to come with regards to climate action and climate change activities across the world. I think that was my last slide. I see the mouse moving. Is that correct? Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bernd Hackman, for this fantastic presentation. This was a great overview over the process and really helps to put things into context and provide a framework. Particularly your point on the link of environment development and development is as an important highlight, and the importance of bringing all stakeholders together is also something that we really recognize. Great. So before I pass to the next presenter, once again, we are seeing some questions come in, which is fantastic. If you have questions, please do write them in the chat box, in the question box, write them down and indicate to which speakers they are. We will collect and we will highlight them and ask them at the Q&A session. Thank you so much. Without further ado, I would now like to pass on to Michelle Peña-Nels from the NDC Partnership. And Michelle, you have the mouse, so over to you.
Muted me.
We can hear you. We can hear
perfect. Thank you so much. I'm sorry. Okay, thank you so much, Nora, and it's a pleasure to be here today. I am pleased today that I can give you a short overview of the NDC partnership, and I will dig in directly, if I may. Right now the mic is not working, I apologize. Oh, there we go. Perfect. Thank you. So Who are we? So the NDC Partnership is a coalition of countries and institutions collaborating to drive transformational climate action while enhancing sustainable development. So the partnership was launched during the COP22 in 2016 in Marrakesh and brings as a coalition together industrialized, emerging and developing countries, regional organizations, UN institutions, multilateral development banks, and non-governmental organizations. At this point, we have a current member count of 138 members, including 97 countries, 27 international institutions, as I mentioned earlier, and 14 associate members. The coalition is led by 2 co-chairs, currently Minister Rodriguez from Costa Rica and Minister Kark from the Netherlands, and as well of a steering committee that is consistent of like a balanced representation of developing and industrialized countries, as well as the World Bank, IDB, UNDP, the World Resource Institute, and the UNFCCC. It is important to mention that we're not an implementing organization. We are a secretariat, and we cooperate with governments and help them to coordinate the donor support in country amongst the members. So our work is guided by principles. So these principles are around enhancing efficiency and responsiveness to countries, support countries in their processes that they lead for long-term climate action, alignment of development and climate change, also while promoting gender equality. Our objectives, there we go. Our objectives are clearly to facilitate improved learning and collaboration, as well as coordination to enhance visibility and access to existing NDC support programs, but also to generate better design, better alignment, also between climate and development agendas, but also to increase political momentum, which is crucial to promote also transformational climate policies. So coming to the core of my presentation, that is really about building efficiency and make efficiency also play a bigger role in the NDCs. We realized that there is a challenge. So building efficiency still remains overlooked in NDCs. And we realized that in the first round of NDCs, sometimes sectorial targets were not included, especially sectorial targets that relate or indirectly relate to climate change and depend on other ministries than the ministries of environment. For instance, targets like renewable energy, but also building efficiency. Adding these targets to the NDCs could mean raising ambition without committing to more efforts than what has been already planned. So we see clearly the 2020 opportunity, and from our own experience, so we see that based on the requests for support that we receive as a partnership, that 10 member countries explicitly mention energy efficiency or building efficiency in their NDC implementation plans. So a way to further include energy efficiency more broadly in the NDCs can be also a better coordination amongst line ministries in country. I would like to bring one example from our countries, St. Lucia. There we can see that the government decided to include building efficiency projects in their mitigation targets. They are planning to fully finance these through their own budget, their own public budget for next year. And this means also that the government is putting notably energy efficiency into the core of their NDCs. So the country partnership plan, one of our main deliverables, is right now approved by the cabinet of the Prime Minister, which shows also this high-level commitment, which is crucial for any kind of implementation. So, but this is not everywhere the case. We see that countries are preparing to enhance their climate ambitions in 2020, and require support to doing so. So yesterday in Abu Dhabi, the NDC partnership had a soft launch of a new initiative that can support, for instance, also the inclusion of building efficiency elements into their revised and updated NDCs. We call this Climate Action Enhancement Package, or CAP. And the CAP is really a way of have a targeted fast-track support to update and enhance NDCs. So the CAP will allow beneficiary countries to submit updated NDCs to the UNFCCC by 2020, as well as to accelerate NDC implementation. So it is also important to mention that the CAP gives clear and coherent signals that resources will be made available for developing countries that wish to raise the level of ambitions in their updated NDCs. So support will be delivered through existing partner resources and expertise. That means all institutional and associate members of the NDC partnership are encouraged to support countries through the CAP with their own resources or by applying for funding from the Technical Assistance Fund. At this point, I would like to invite you for more information to visit the NDC Partnership website, because I don't have much time right now to go into further detail. So under NDC Partnership/CAP, you can find more information about the package itself, how to apply, and I'm happy to answer any questions later on. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Michelle. This was a great overview over the work of the NDC partnership and your approach to enhancing buildings and construction commitments and NDCs, especially also, I think the CAP was very interesting also for countries to learn about. Without further ado, I am now going to give the mouse to Peter Graham, who will present the insights from our NDC guide specifically on buildings and construction. And without further ado, Peter, over to you.
Thank you very much, Nora, and thank you, Bernard and Michelle, for setting the scene. I am going to present in a little bit more detail one of the tools which is available to countries to focus on improving ambition in the building sector actions described in NDCs. It's a guide for incorporating buildings actions in NDCs, and it focuses on how to map, prioritize, and then implement actions in the building sector which will really give you the best outcomes from a mitigation point of view, but also connect with adaptation goals, and importantly, frame building sector actions in ways which meet funding requirements. So my task is to give you an overview of the main messages. I also wanted to point out that I am involved in another organization as well called the Global Buildings Performance Network, which is a network of building energy and climate policy experts in 22 countries around the world, which are also available to provide support on design and implementation of building sector actions. So what is the context for the guide? So as has been mentioned before, there are a range of countries which have included building sector actions or described the building sector as an important locus for action in their NDCs. 136 parties, countries, have referenced building sector actions. But according to the GlobalABC's status report last year, if you calculate the mitigation effect of the actions already included in NDCs, it only covers about 60% of building-related greenhouse gas emissions. The building sector isn't currently decarbonising, and so clearly there's a need for greater ambition. In developing the guide, I conducted a global survey of countries to find out what was the process by which they arrived at the actions they included in their NDCs, what they were considering putting into NDCs as next steps, and and also what would the main barriers. Now, the main barriers really were about access to finance. That was the #1 concern of countries, and so the guide's really designed around how you can increase the scope of actions in the building sector, so increasing the number of building types or the scope of emissions, or increasing the performance of the building sector through instituting new policies for net zero energy buildings, or even how to improve the integration with adaptation strategies, which tend to be more holistic, but also integration between local, regional and national levels of government, and then horizontal integration across different industries. When we looked at what was included in the NDCs as building sector actions, clearly policy actions were most often referenced, followed by technology actions. And when talking about policies, the countries were looking at new codes. Many countries don't have residential building energy codes, for example, so that was one of the ones which was included often, and then also increasing the stringency of existing codes, so going to net zero, for example, or extending building code jurisdiction to renovations. Building energy efficiency was a very prevalent focus for activities, but there were also other references to more holistic performance, so green building, which included water efficiency, resource efficiencies, and so on, and improvements in indoor environment quality and thermal comfort. And the other insight that we can gain from analysing building sector actions across climate commitments more generally is that it's really the non-state actors which are very, very active in calling out building sector as a locus for action, particularly cities. So there's a great opportunity for vertical integration and quite a lot of very ambitious goals being set, particularly by municipalities. So that offers national governments a way of connecting with champions for the building sector and champions for ambition in commitments. Okay, let's try the next slide. So the guide is designed to be a tool which enables you to participate effectively in the process of updating the NDCs and participating in the global stock takes and so forth that Bern had laid out. And it tries to focus on what the key challenges are that would have been communicated by countries. And these really are about how to design, plan, implement and finance effective building sector actions. So let's take a look at the sections of the guide in a little bit more detail. If we can. Here we go. So the guide is structured in 3 parts, and you can dive into any of the parts depending on where you are in your cycle of planning or applications of or updating of the NDCs. So the first one is about mapping, and that helps you determine what the scope of actions and building industry sectors should be included. So this is about understanding what you've already got as local capacity, where the opportunities for really driving deep savings in energy and mitigation of emissions are. The second is about how to prioritise mitigation goals and using general funding criteria drawn mainly from multilateral donors and investors. So looking not just at the public sector finance, but also the private sector finance criteria, and then how to implement the actions, including governance, across levels of government, and dealing with integration at the vertical, horizontal, and what we call the diagonal of involving civil society and the private sector. So in a little more detail, the guide will help you with some of the establishment issues that funders are looking for example, making sure that actions are established along measurable, reportable and verifiable baselines, that the policies and capabilities that exist in a market are appropriately acknowledged, and that there are local market transformation plans or action plans that are based on that important data. The second is about prioritization and really looking at what are funders looking for. And this is really important because it speaks to the need for ambition and also the support that's available to countries that are taking ambitious steps. So real transformative and scalable actions are what's being looked for, not one-off projects or programs. In terms of the implementation, we see that it's important for the funders in particular to see transparency and good governance. So this is about highly coordinated efforts across the spectrum of governance and different jurisdictions within a country. So the guide then goes into, there's more resources, little case studies and examples from a range of countries. These countries, Argentina, Cameroon, Mexico, Mongolia, Morocco, Senegal, and Tunisia, participated directly in surveys and have more comprehensive case studies of their approach to including building sector actions in their NDCs. We also are aligning some of the support resources from GlobalABC members so that there are places that you can go to find a local expert or a tool or some best practice guidelines that could assist you in developing actions to incorporate in NDCs and examples of good practice where we're seeing some impacts already. So the final slide is about next steps. Just try and click on that. Yeah, so the guide, you can download the guide from the GlobalABC website. This year, we're making a few enhancements. We're translating the guide. The Mandarin version is in review right now, and we should be released soon. We're obviously having a webinar series, so this is the first one, and we'll have regional deep dives coming up. The next one is with Latin America, and then we have Africa and finally Asia toward the end of the year. So there's more that can be more information that can be sought on a regional level. We're also now looking at this issue of vertical integration, or vertical, horizontal, and diagonal integration. So I'm currently conducting research and doing case studies to try and find out how countries are aligning various levels of government, the private sector, and particularly between municipalities, regional governments, and the national governments to prepare for implementation of building sector actions and to report back as per the UNFCCC requirements. So if you do have some good case studies on your implementation process or your building sector actions, please do send me an email, and we'll see if we can get you involved in this next stage of work. Thanks, Nora. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much, Peter, for this great insight into the NDC guide. This was, I think, very interesting, in particular also your highlight on finance as one of the main challenges countries encounter on the one hand, and on the other hand, potential funders really looking for NDCs with high mitigation potential, so NDCs that are really ambitious. I think this is an important part where both sides can come together. Also, your highlight of the emissions gap, so in other words, what NDC commitments are currently covering in terms of emissions was very interesting. Thank you for that. I would now like to go into our case study segment, starting with Mr. Maolin Liu from the China Academy for Building Research. Thank you for joining, and over to you. You have the mouse.
Hello.
Yes,
can you hear me?
Hear you. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, nice to meet you. And I'm Maolin Liu from China Academy of Building Research. Today, I would like to introduce you some the status of green development in building sectors. Firstly, I would like to introduce the concept of green buildings. So the first stage in 1980s. From 1980s, it's about energy efficiencies. So what we call energy saving. So it's specifically focusing on the building, about the performance of the building. And secondly, from the 2000, the first green building assessment standard was released in 26. So the green building has a comprehensive concept about land, energy, water, and material saving, and also the environmental protection. So it's not only focusing on the building, it cares about the environment, the surrounding environment. And from the last year, from this year, the ministry announced the high quality development in building sectors. So what we now call is a green building under a new era. Because what is the high quality building is? So in our idea, it's about high quality means that people can experience the benefits of green building. So the buildings is not only a building, it's about a place that let people have a good living quality, and this is based on the environment friendly design or construction or demolish the whole life cycle process. So I think ecology oriented or focusing is a good terminology to describe this. And so under this based on this background, energy saving building, passive ultra low energy building, and the latest nearly zero energy building, and now the green buildings. These terminologies and the technical composition name comes from the background. And what we in China style, how do we develop and how do we promote these concepts and these systems? In our way, it's about top level design. So what it means that the government have a very general and broad development routine, and then the ministry to make the policies or the plans specifically focusing on building sectors. Based on these plans, the Ministry of Technology set some research programs to deepen the research capability. So we have a 5-year plan research and development program. Every 5 years, we renew it, we upgrade it to set new goals. So nowadays, the building industrialization, the ultra low energy building and green buildings are the focus. And based on these research programs, standards are one kind of achievements. So it likes a chain that policies give the direction of national research, and the national research produces standards. So, and after this, because we need the market to operate, so the government, the central government, and also the provincial government give financial support to the project, to the companies. So this is So this is a mode that I give. The policies sometimes is about encouragement, but in some areas, especially high developed areas in China, to promote the green buildings is forced by the government. Like that, the new construction building for publics have to achieve 1-star green building like this. And also in some areas, to develop a green building is not only a policy, it comes into the law, like Shanghai and Fujian and Hebei and some other province. So currently, by December of 2017, 1 billion square meter floor area buildings are green buildings. And according to the latest news from last Friday, the Ministry of Housing officials said that in 2018, 1.58 billion square meters are green buildings in China. And in this process, CABR, as the largest comprehensive research and development institution in the building industry of China, plays a leading role. We have the state's key laboratory of environments, and also we undertake the 5-year plan research like national key technology research and development programs to give ways of the government to decide how to assess the development and how and what kind of technologies should be taken, and also the this topic not only focus on green building but from in a very comprehensive topics like green building and ultra low energy buildings. Also, we undertake standard drafting like energy efficiencies, and the latest one is the standard for building carbon emission calculation, which was issued just in several months ago. Because we have this research, and also we have the experience of establish the national standard to promote green buildings. So we have very mature consulting services or design services to help the companies or the government to realize the goal. So CABR undertakes the most case pilot projects in China. And also we have a company which is called PKPM. It's about software to help to stimulate the daylight, the energy consumption, and all the things about a building environment. And the PKPM now dominates 95% markets of whole China in this area. Excuse me. Okay. So according to the guideline, I would like to introduce some the importance of the building building sectors to realize NDCs. I searched some information. It said that in 2015, total area of buildings is 57.3 billion square meter in China, and the consumption of building reached 0.86 billion tons standard coal, which accounts for 20% of the national total value. In 2016, a little bit rise for the tons standard coal about consumptions of buildings, but it still accounts for 19% of national energy consumption in China. And according to the expert from Development Research Center of the State Council, by the end of 2020, the total floor area of buildings will reach 69 billion square meter in China, while it will arrive 80 billion square meter by 2030. So the corresponding consumption is arriving 1.46 billion ton standard coal. We can see that this contributes a lot of consumptions. So the building sectors in China undertakes a very significant way to realize. And according to some papers that I read, the consumption of the building in China is still rising, but the consumption of transport and also industrial will be going down in future. And I want to share some latest actions about in China. It's about three standards. The first one is the Green Building Standard, which is just issued in March. Sorry. Yes, in March. It totally changed the concepts of green building from the last edition. Now it considers the safety, durability, health, comfort, occupant convenience, resources saving, and environment livability. The other one is the Green School Assessment Standard, issued in March. So after this one, 10 national assessment standards for green building, including building, industrial building, hospital, expo, hotel, retrofit of existing building, green school, and green eco districts have been built for a whole frame to assess different kind of buildings. And the third one is the standard for building carbon emission calculation, issued in April. This is the first standard that helps people to about calculation, including material production, delivering, construction, demolish, operation, and the whole process of the buildings. And lastly, I want to share some specific topics that I think is important. Sorry. Yes, the first one is about cooperation between countries. Sometimes we just, because from my own experience, I think most of the time we just have a very general talk, but we need to go too deep for very specific cooperation on green buildings. And the second one is to build a free market globally for green product, because green product is essential for green building, like Velux, the Windows brand, which is very famous. It does not mean that in China we do not have very good product, but I think a global free market for product exchange is very important. And thirdly, it's about the financial markets. The green finance now is very famous and promoted by the ministry. It focuses on the insurance and also the mortgages for the real estate companies and to stimulate the green building markets. And lastly, it is about the green behavior dissemination to individuals, because it is important to guide people to behave green. So this is all my presentation today. I want to share with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Maolin Liu, for joining us and for this excellent presentation, for giving us insights into the NDC of China, in particular also your systems and the comprehensive approach to a green building that provides good livelihoods for people, as well as into delving down into the specifics. We would now like to go on to our next case study, and that is Mongolia with Mr. Zamba Batyagal. Thank you so much for joining us, and over to you.
Okay. Hello. Good evening, because in Mongolia already evening, and I'm not alone here, and asked 3 ladies to join me because if some questions and so on. The Mr. Shirgal Sarwal from Minister of Environment and Tourism, and Ms. Tushin from the Minister of Construction and Urban Development, and we're a powerful team today for this webinar. And but my presentation would be very short and only few slides, because compare Mongolia with China, of course. China could spend 15 minutes, but for me, 5 minutes would be enough, I think. And okay, okay, where is my post? Yeah. I have problem to move my slides. Anyway, okay. Why do we do that? Of course. The construction sector in Mongolia accounts only for 40% of the country's total GHG emissions, and but a big concern and challenges related to the energy efficiency, energy consumption, and energy loss reached up to 60% currently. And we have just a small table which showed energy consumption in construction sector starting in 2015, and some growth to 2013, and baseline GHG emission also accordingly grow. And the graph you can see is this total energy consumption. This blue column, and the red one is just CO2 emission. This estimation was made between the NAMA project in Mongolia. Next one. Okay. And GHG emission of construction sector, we just divided into section: apartment building and public building. And the starting 2000s, and we have last figure for 2017, and in total emission is around 10 million ton. And of course, because of increase of population and increase of the building, the residential housing and so on, the GHG emission related construction sector will definitely increase. And but today the policy related to construction in respect to climate change from two sides. And from one side, of course, government need to provide one of the basic human needs, the shelter, provide the residents the housing and public building and so on. On the other hand, the big requirement in respect of environment. In 2014, the Parliament of Mongolia approved so-called Green Development Policy. And according to the policy, the requirement is to implement advanced technology and standards, and including many kinds of activities which already listed in previous presentations. And what we have list of policy documents in construction and urban development sector in related to climate change. Of course, I will not read, and two categories of documents, and long-term policy documents and mid-term policy documents. Only one small correction is that the number 9 said that triple supportable policy. It's not triple supported. Translation mistake. The three-pillar development policy should read. And next slide. And one of the principal document for the government of Mongolia is Sustainable Development Vision, which was approved by the Parliament in 2016. And of course, there is very ambitious objective in this document, telling that we have to develop sustainable urban development with world-class green development. And but one figure, it is we have to reduce heat loss in buildings by 20%. And another target we can find from another program, so-called NDC Partnership program, because government especially designing some buildings sponsored by the governments, and which can apply different kind of modern standards and so on, innovation, and which not every time can be possible in private sector investment exercise. And in Mongolia, the every government during its term of reference developing special action program, and the current government also developed some action plan, and the one of interesting objective was that incorporate international standards in the construction sector, and introduce experience from some countries, advanced countries, in order to reach cost-effective solutions and low running costs for new construction design and so on. What was it?
Next.
Okay. And just as example, another special program, the 150,000 household apartments, especially for this program, it was special fixed task to reduce GHG emission, supporting new construction in line with requirement of green development. But still, action plan is in process for being approved, and we also still making some input to this program draft. And my last slide can show that we have the business as usual scenario, this red line, and next one is the curve according to the NDC, and now we have some ambitious target. We are now developing new documents, not exactly upgraded NDC. It is quite new document NDC. And if NDC, we just include in NDC, they will cover only energy sector, transportation, and industry. Now we are going to add construction sector, agriculture sector, mining, waste, and so on. And we will have more ambitious target. And the construction sector would be one of the very active sector, which should make some significant contribution to the ambitious target of the new NDC document. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zamba Batyagal, for this comprehensive insight into the Mongolian NDC and the process, especially also your highlight of involving infrastructure and how the policy process works with the medium and long-term approach, and also giving us an overview over the emissions profile. This was really great. Thank you so much. I would now like to go to our last, but most certainly not least speaker, et je voudrais l'introduire en français car elle vient de la Tunisie et elle parle français parmi d'autres langues, et c'est Madame Ibtissem Bouataï. Elle gère des projets pour the Ministry of Housing and Land Use Planning en Tunisie. Donc, merci beaucoup de nous avoir joints aujourd'hui, Ibtissem, et c'est à vous. Merci.
Bonjour. Hello, everyone. You hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Donc, tu me donnes la main?
C'est fait, Ibtissem. Vous avez la main.
D'accord. Comment je fais? Je sais pas. Une slide. Voilà. Okay, donc I'm Ibtissem from Tunisia, and I will present you our sector building and our NDC. Okay. Donc Tunisia proposes reducing its greenhouse gas emissions across all sectors in order to lower its carbon intensity by 41% in 2030, relative to the base year 2010. Mitigation efforts will particularly center on the energy sector, which alone accounts of 75% of the emission reductions contributing to this decrease in carbon intensity. So we estimate that the energy sector will reduce its carbon intensity in 2030 by 46% compared with 2010. Okay. And okay, in this slide we can show how we can reduce in greenhouse gas emissions efficiency measured by sector and by type. Donc with energy, renewable energy, and how we can make it possible to reduce our carbon intensity in the energy sector by approximately 46% in 2030. Okay. After slide. Okay. After slide, Nora. Okay, thank you. Donc, approximately, we have about 30 millions. 30 million meters squares. In the construction sector, currently ranked third in terms of national energy consumption with a rate of 26%. So if no energy management strategy is adopted, this sector, the sector construction, will occupy the first position by 2030 and the second by 2020, if not counting the consumption of industrial and transport sector related to building materials. And we can show the slides. Okay. Voilà. The next slide, please, Nora. Okay, donc, for the building sector and the NDC, Tunisia has set its NDC target to reduce greenhouse gas emission by 2030 from the construction sector to 11.5% through energy efficiency and 1.75% through direct measures from renewable energy. So about 30% of the overall national target set in the NDC will come from energy efficiency measures in the construction sector. Okay. Donc, we can show the goals with energy efficiency in building. The sector energy occupied 30% from NDC, national NDC. And you can show the sector of building, sector is about 11.5% from energy. Okay. Voilà, donc we have about around 20 energy efficiency action and programs have been included in the calculation of avoidable emissions in building sector. The mitigation plans includes the use of a NAMA in the cement industry from 2006 onwards, and access on this sector to carbon marks from 2021 onwards. Voilà. This slide shows us how many programs and action in sector building. So we have programs in thermal regulation of new buildings, thermal programs of problem isolation, many programs, about 20 action and programs. And we can take example, we have the NAMA building with 3 programs. I will programs in voilà. The first programs in solar water heater, and the second in solar photovoltaic. The troisième programme, the thermal insulation of roofs present. I take an example. Sorry. Now, if you take the program, the solar water heater, with regards to solar heating, we intend to triple the solar water heater distribution rate, which will exceed 220 meters square of collectors by 1,000 inhabitants in 2030, compared to 73 in 2010. A financing mechanism for solar water heaters in the housing sector, called ProSol, has been in place since 2005. And this mechanism is based on the public-private partnership, the PPP. For the program solar photovoltaic, it's about since 2010, Tunisia has set up a mechanism for financing photovoltaic solar installation for the self-production of electricity connected to the low voltage grid in the residential sector. And the mechanism is based on government subsidy plus ensured rate credit granted by a local bank, repayable through the electricity and gas bill. And Le troisième programme is the thermal insulation of roofs. It presents an important energy saving deposit in the existing and the new residential sector, and the thermal insulation of roof will reduce the energy consumption of heating and air conditioning in the housing by about 20%. The measure fairly easy and fast in terms of execution. The mechanism is based on the public-private partnership through a government subsidy and enhanced rate credit guaranteed by a local bank. Okay? Thank you for all. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you very much, Ibtissam. Merci beaucoup for this comprehensive presentation on the Tunisian building sector and the NDCs, in particular also on the three components, the financial component, technology, and communication. This was great and very insightful, and I'm sure of great interest to our listeners and perhaps especially to countries. This brings us to the section on the Q&A. We've received many interesting questions. Thank you so much to all of our attendees for having provided those. And let me start by a number of questions around the topic of life cycle emissions and embodied carbon. So we've had a number of attendees raising questions on that. The first question is on a significant share of emissions is because of embodied carbon and because of materials used. How can we make sure that materials receive proper attention in nationally determined contributions? And this question I would like to pose first to Peter Graham and then also to Michelle Peña-Nels. So Peter, floor to you. What are your thoughts?
Thank you very much for that question. It is a very important issue. It's also worth noting that in terms of near-term emission reduction potential, dealing with embodied emissions is very important because it takes around 10 years of operating energy to equal the embodied energy in new buildings. So very important issue. I think in terms of the way it's covered in NDCs, some countries are including industrial energy efficiency as a broad category of actions. Some of those actions cover manufacturing, but I think there isn't a significant level of detail yet in NDCs specifying actions which reduce high emitting materials or emissions from high embodied energy materials. So I think it is an important issue. It may well be covered to some extent by the energy efficiency measures in industry, but there isn't that level of detail that would provide certainty. I think another element that it has come up in is in the adaptation plans. I did a review of the national adaptation plans for building sector actions also last year, and there is some attention to more holistic approaches, green building approaches, low carbon materials, more resilient materials, looking specifically at low cement, high fly ash content concretes, geopolymers and other things which may be more climate resilient. So some of those were really mentioned in the adaptation plans, but we do need a little bit more detail, I think, coming through the NDCs to make sure that issue is properly addressed. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Michelle, your thoughts?
Yes, thank you. I think I just have two aspects that I would like to raise. They're equally important. I think one is really the importance of awareness around energy efficiency, not only around like the complexity of the topic, but also about technology and materials that are available, et cetera, et cetera. But the other thing is also the coordination, and I think that's something that I mentioned in my presentation, is the coordination between ministries that is really key. So the NDC partnership really seeks and to bring like all the line ministry to one table to have these conversations, also to actually really build this awareness and bring different sectors together, amongst them obviously like the building and construction, in order to really tackle this also in the NDCs and in implementation. And obviously like NDC enhancements is right now also another opportunity to address these different aspects and into the new round.
Thanks so much, Michelle. Question, let's continue, let's stay with the topic of life cycle for a moment. Question to our Mongolian speaker, Mr. Zamba Batyagal. Could you tell us a little bit more about the emissions resulting from construction in Mongolia, or in other words, the figure you cited for emissions from buildings in Mongolia? Does that include the construction side of things as well? Thank you.
Okay, just I would like to make sure that I understood correctly your question. And you mean some improvement of technology in construction exercise and reduction of emission linkage or something like that?
Yes, so you cited a figure of, I believe, 14% of emissions are resulting from buildings. And the question would be whether that figure includes emissions from construction material production.
Okay. But this figure 14, which we fixed in NDC, is the general one, including everything. It is average emission reduction by 2030, mostly in energy sector, but in the energy sector also includes transportation, construction, and so on. And now we are going to decouple energy sector from the mix, and now we are already making special estimation what portion of GHG can be related to the construction itself, or the construction material, or energy efficiency, and so on. And it means this 14 is quite different figure than it is not just related to the construction sector.
Thank you very much, Zamba Batyagal, for this comprehensive answer. Let's continue on the topic of standards and average performance. And here a question we received is for our speaker from China, for Mr. Maolin Liu. And the question is, what is the average energy performance in China for the green buildings you mentioned earlier? Thank you. I think you may need to unmute yourself, Maolin Liu. We cannot currently hear you. There you
Excuse
go.
me?
Yes.
Hello?
No problem. Hi, yes, now we
Okay.
can hear you.
So you mean the energy, can you repeat the question? Hello?
Sure. Yes, of course. So the question is, what is the average energy performance that is expected of green buildings in China?
So you mean the currently, or because from the 2006, we have the first green building concepts, which is from the first standard, and currently it has been going to the third edition, which is issued which is issued this year. So so which Which stage do you want to know?
The current one would be great.
Okay. Currently the green building performance is not in China. Is not only focusing on the consumption. It just giveaways like design method or the material selection and the land planning to give comprehensive ways for the owners to construct these buildings, considering the health of people, considering the availability, considering convenience, considering also the land saving, water saving, and everything. A lot of issues which considers exactly 100 articles. It's a comprehensive control, like not, but that I want to emphasize is not only an exact energy consumption. Is it clear?
Yes, thank you very much. We do have one follow-up question directly on that, whether China would consider a minimum energy performance threshold for green buildings in the future. Understanding, of course, that your concept is a comprehensive one, but the question relates specifically to the energy component.
For the energy consumptions, you mean an exact value?
So the question is on a minimum threshold, yes. Yeah. So a value for a minimum threshold, a minimum energy performance threshold.
Okay, so there are two things. The first one is that compared to the standard building in 1980s, our energy saving percent will arrive more than 75, because currently many requirements from Beijing or Shanghai, these high developed areas, have these requirements to improve the energy consumption compared to 1980s with a value of 75%. And in the other side, because nowadays we promote nearly energy buildings. For these energy buildings, only 25 kmh per square meter per year is consumed each year, below this value. Yeah.
Thank you very much, and thank you again. Yes, thank you very much, and thank you again for all our speakers and for your comprehensive answers. We've come to the end of our webinar. As conclusion, allow me to ask each speaker in one sentence, short and sweet, one single sentence, if you had one thing that is essential for an effective NDC for buildings and construction, what is that one thing? Starting with Bernd Hackman.
Thank you, Nora. I think it is about time that the sector, together with governments, works out a roadmap that is ambitious on the one hand, but doable on the other hand. So that requires a lot of dialogue between the government and stakeholders from the sector. But I think from what we heard, it is important that these actors join forces in order to develop NDCs, but ultimately climate action that brings us to implementing the Paris Agreement and achieving the global objectives therein. Thank you. And thanks so much for having me here at the webinar.
Thank you, Bernd. And over to, we heard dialogue, stakeholder dialogue, joining forces, ambition raising, but also making it practical. Over to you, Michelle. What are your thoughts?
well, in the danger of repeating myself, I think following also Bernd's idea, it is really important, again, what I said earlier, coordination between ministries, having like the Ministry of Environment talk to the Energy Ministry to have construction also and on the same page, and water and other ministries, and all of this, well, obviously also like very important, also the Ministry of Finance, and link all the work also into like long-term strategies.
Great. So we heard the long-term strategy and the coordination as crucial. Thank you. Peter.
Thank you, Nora. Thank you, everybody, for the great presentations. Mine would be a common goal so that the various ministries and various levels of government, from local to national, can join forces behind a common objective. I'd suggest, given the Paris Agreement goals and the importance of the sector, it is decarbonisation of the sector as a common aim. That's kind of necessary in order to achieve the Paris Agreement goal. And I would challenge or suggest that countries find the most ambitious commitment being made at any level of government within their country and try and include it in their NDC for the building sector. Thank you.
Fantastic. Common goal is crucial, and finding the most ambitious one as the baseline. Thank you. Maolin Liu, what are your thoughts? One thing for an effective NDC.
I think to arouse the people's awareness to behave in green, because from my perspective, I think technologies can already help to achieve zero energy building, and policies have already been in laws to included to promote the green development. But the people's recognition or awareness of green still need to improve.
Fantastic, thank you. So we have the question of awareness as crucial. Samba Batyagal, what are your thoughts? You may need to unmute yourself. We currently cannot hear you. If not, let's go on to Ibtisam. Ibtisam, what are your thoughts on one effective thing that is essential, one thing that is essential for an effective NDC, Ibtisam?
Si tu peux traduire, s'il te plaît, la question.
Bien sûr, Ibtisam. La
Merci.
question, c'est s'il y a une seule recommandation qui est absolument essentielle pour qu'un NDC soit effectif, ça serait quoi?
Je pense qu'il faut mettre en place un système de vérification de la réalisation de nos NDC au niveau du secteur du bâtiment.
Parfait, merci beaucoup. So,
merci à vous.
System verification to ensure that we're really doing what we have set out to do. Fantastic recommendation. Another attempt, Samba Batyagal, last words from you on what is essential for an effective NDC?
Okay, good. It's noted. Do you know Mongolia? For the Mongolia, urbanization is quite new phenomenon. We have to learn more experience from other countries. Just one correction, what your question about 40% as was computed, it was just not average for the country. It was exactly related to the construction sector, and we have to manage with that. And it's my correction. Thank you. Thank you for inviting us to attend.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Samba Batyagal, also for the correction. We've come now to the end of our webinar. Thank you all very, very much for joining us. Warm thank you to our fantastic speakers, and for your comprehensive presentations and your great answers to our questions on NDCs and what makes them effective. Thank you to all our attendees and for your great questions. We tried to bundle them. I'm sorry we could not answer all of them because we've had a lot, which is great, which shows interest. But please do join us for our next webinar, and we hope to see you again. Thank you so much and have a great day. Have a great evening, all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nora. Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.